He entered prison as just another name on the roster, a quiet black man with calm eyes and a criminal record that didn't match his presence. Within hours, he became a target. The walls whispered, the guards looked away, and one man decided to make him a spectacle. In a place ruled by hate and hierarchy, survival isn't about strength. It's about breaking first. But when the torment began, no one knew who they were really dealing with. Because beneath that silence was something far more dangerous than anyone imagined. They thought they were breaking him. They were waking a ghost. Before prison walls and whispered threats, Dante Williams lived in silence by choice. Once his name filled arenas, crowds chanting the ghost as lights flashed and cameras roared. But fame had a cost. One fight went too far, one man didn't wake up, and the glory turned to guilt. Dante vanished from the spotlight, trading trophies for peace, the cage for a quiet life, working at a small gym on the south side. He spent his mornings training kids who saw hope in his patience, not his power. His nights were still meditation, reflection, redemption. To most, he was just another man trying to rebuild. But that peace wouldn't last. A single bar fight, one he didn't start, would drag him into a nightmare he could never have imagined. He thought his punishment was 18 months behind bars. He didn't know it was a setup. The first day inside felt like stepping into another world, one where skin color dictated rank, and silence was the only form of survival. Riverside Correctional wasn't just a prison. It was a kingdom ruled by hate, and Tank Morrison was its king. His empire stretched across the yard, built on fear and blood. The guards didn't control this place. Tank did. His word was law, his rules absolute. For a newcomer like Dante Williams, a quiet black man with no gang, no allies, and no history, he was an easy mark. The first confrontation came before lunch. Tank's voice boomed across the yard, dripping with cruelty, as hundreds of inmates turned to watch. He called Dante out not for what he'd done, but for what he represented, a target painted by color alone. They circled him like vultures waiting for weakness. But Dante didn't flinch. His breathing stayed steady, eyes calm, body still. That calmness only made Tank angrier. To men like him, composure was defiance. What followed wasn't a beating, it was theater. Tank forced Dante to his knees, shouting slurs loud enough for the cameras to hear. He dumped food over his head, spat in his face, made him crawl like an animal, while the others laughed and recorded. Those videos would circulate through hidden phones by nightfall, spreading humiliation like wildfire. But what no one noticed, what no one could possibly understand, was the way Dante moved. Every breath, every micro-adjustment of muscle and posture was perfect control. Years of training disguised as surrender. The abuse became routine. Tank used him as an example. What happens when you step out of line? He made Dante clean toilets with his bare hands, sleep on cold tiles, eat leftovers tossed at his feet. Guards looked away, pockets lined with drug money. Every act of cruelty had purpose, to strip away his humanity piece by piece. Yet through it all, Dante endured. He never raised his voice, never fought back. He was a ghost among monsters, haunting them with quiet resistance. At night, while others slept, Dante meditated. His cellmate, Carlos, a former Marine, began to notice things. How Dante's bruises healed faster than they should. How he breathed like a man measuring time in heartbeats, not hours. There was power hidden beneath that silence. Something dangerous and disciplined. "Who are you?" Carlos once asked under his breath. But Dante only looked down, the weight of his promise holding him still. He wasn't here to fight. He was here for something bigger. Days blurred together until humiliation turned into obsession. Tank couldn't break him, and that terrified him. He'd ruled Riverside for 8 years by crushing spirits, but this man refused to bend. Rumors spread that the new inmate wasn't ordinary, that the way he moved was unnatural. Some said military. Others whispered government. A few swore they recognized the tattoo on his back, a fiery scene from Dante's Inferno. Still, Tank dismissed it all. He couldn't afford to believe fear. Then came the escalation. Hot water turned scalding in the showers. Work assignments doubled. Sleep was denied. Each attempt to break Dante only revealed his strength. He didn't retaliate, But his silence became a mirror, forcing Tank to see the cowardice beneath his hate. And that made him dangerous. The racism that fueled Tank's empire wasn't just cruelty, it was control. But now that control was slipping. The other inmates began to watch Dante differently. They saw the man who refused to scream, the man who wouldn't kneel when Tank branded him property and burned his own hand by accident. The whispers grew louder. They said it wasn't luck. They said the new guy moved too precisely. Even Tank's lieutenants started to wonder. But Tank doubled down, planning one last spectacle to destroy Dante publicly. A dogfight that would humiliate him beyond recovery. Dante spent the night before the event in silence, eyes closed, breathing steady. Every humiliation, every slur, every scar was a reminder of why he was there. This wasn't about pride. It was about justice. Somewhere beyond these walls, the world kept turning, blind to the suffering within. But soon they would see. He thought enduring the pain would be enough to expose the system. He didn't know the next day would force him to become everything he swore he'd never be again. Tomorrow, the ghost would rise. The yard transformed into an arena of hate. 400 inmates formed a roaring circle, hungry for blood. The air buzzed with tension, cameras hidden in every hand, streaming live to racist forums beyond the prison walls. Tank Morrison stood at the center, savoring every second of his own twisted performance. His booming voice echoed to the megaphone as he announced the main event, the dogfight. His words dripped venom as he introduced Dante Williams not as a man, but as a pet, a creature meant to entertain his audience. Around him, guards turned their backs, their silence bought and paid for. This was Tank's world, his rules, his stage. Dante walked into the circle without a word, barefoot, shirtless, head lowered. The concrete beneath him felt cold and endless, like the surface of judgment itself. He didn't see faces, only shadows moving in slow, hateful rhythm. Across from him stood Tommy Bulldog Smith, a 240-pound enforcer, Tank's most trusted lieutenant. Tattoos of hate covered his skin. In his right hand glinted a makeshift blade, sharpened for this very moment. Tank wanted to make sure the humiliation was final and irreversible. The crowd erupted as Tommy charged forward, swinging wild and fast. The noise was deafening. Taunts, laughter, racial slurs mixing into a storm of chaos. But through the noise, Dante heard only his own heartbeat. Slow, steady, focused. His body moved on instinct, weaving between blows with impossible grace. Years of discipline disguised as stillness unfolded in seconds. Tommy's punches sliced through empty air as if Dante were made of smoke. For the first time, the yard fell silent. The spectacle was shifting. Tank's smirk faltered. This wasn't defiance. It was art. Every movement Dante made carried purpose. Every dodge, every pivot, was a language only warriors understood. Then came the moment that changed everything. Tommy lunged again, blade raised, hate blazing his eyes. But Dante had seen this motion 1,000 times before, in cages, in rings, in nightmares. His body reacted before thought. A subtle step, a single strike, a whisper of motion too fast for the eye to follow. Tommy collapsed before the blade even hit the ground. The yard froze. No one understood what had happened. Only that one of the most feared men in the prison now lay unconscious, untouched except for a small mark at his temple. Silence stretched like eternity. Then someone whispered, trembling, "That's the ghost." The word spread like wildfire. Inmates lifted their phones higher, cameras flashing, streams exploding across the internet. In that instant, humiliation turned into revelation. The man they'd mocked, beaten, and degraded was the same fighter whose name once echoed across the world. Tank's power shattered. His empire, built on fear and cruelty, collapsed under the weight of truth. He stumbled backward, staring at the screen of his own phone as the live stream view count skyrocketed. Millions were watching. The world outside was seeing everything he'd done, every racial slur, every act of violence, every humiliation. The same platform he used to exploit hate had become his undoing. Guards flooded the yard too late to control the chaos. Inmates screamed, some cheering, some cursing, as Tank's men scattered. Cameras captured every second of his downfall. For the first time, Tank saw fear, not in others, but in himself. The monster who ruled through racism and brutality now trembled in front of a man he'd once called less than human. Dante stood motionless amid the chaos, breathing steady, eyes closed. He hadn't planned this moment, hadn't wanted to fight, but justice as a way of finding its moment, even when peace no longer can. When he finally opened his eyes, it wasn't rage that burned within them. It was sorrow, because he knew this wasn't victory. It was exposure. The world would see the truth, but at what cost? As the guards dragged him away in chains, the crowd parted. Phones followed his every step. Somewhere beyond those walls, the footage was spreading like wildfire, igniting conversations the world had tried to silence for years. He had come to prison to survive. Instead, he became a mirror, showing the world the face of its own cruelty. But the story wasn't over, because power never surrenders quietly, and Tank Morrison wasn't finished yet. The video spread faster than wildfire, across phones, newsrooms, and dinner tables. Within hours, the world knew the name Dante Williams, not as a criminal, not as an inmate, but as the man who exposed the hate that thrived behind concrete walls. The footage played on every network, dissected by anchors and analysts who spoke of justice and discipline, while ignoring the uglier truth it revealed, that racism didn't die in the streets. It adapted, surviving in uniforms and institutions built to protect it. The same world that once cheered for the ghost now argued over his humanity. Some call him a hero, others labeled him dangerous. But behind those debates was a question no one wanted to face. Why did a black man have to be brutalized before the world finally opened its eyes? Dante's life would never return to normal. The Bureau used his mission as leverage, sealing files and erasing names, while the system twisted his story into headlines that sold outrage. His quiet strength became a symbol for some, a target for others. He was transferred to a federal facility for his protection, but everyone knew what that meant: containment, silence, control. Meanwhile, Tank Morrison's empire collapsed. Investigations exposed the drug networks, the corrupt guards, the streaming profits made from hate. He lost everything but the ideology that built him, a poison too deep to remove with justice alone. The courts would sentence him, yes, but nothing could sentence the millions who watched and found excuses for what they saw. Carlos testified anonymously, his words painting the truth the world didn't want to hear. They didn't break him because he was strong, he said. They broke themselves trying. Those words trended briefly, then faded beneath the next scandal, the next distraction. But for the ones who understood, the message lingered. Racism wasn't just a moment. It was a structure, one that demanded moments like Dante's to remind the world it still stood. In solitary, Dante found peace in the only place he still controlled, his mind. Every scar told a story. Every breath was proof he hadn't been erased. He didn't seek fame or forgiveness. He sought meaning. The mission that began as infiltration had become something far greater. He had walked through hate and shown what resilience looked like, not the kind that punches back, but the kind that endures, that exposes, that forces a mirror in front of the world and whispers, "Look at what you become." Outside the prison walls, debates continued. Politicians used his name as a headline. Activists used it as a rallying cry. But the truth was simpler and harder for every Dante Williams. There were thousands whose stories would never be recorded, whose suffering wouldn't trend. The real tragedy wasn't what happened to one man. It was that his story wasn't unique. Months later, during a televised interview, a journalist asked, "Do you regret fighting back?" Dante looked into the camera with calm eyes, the same calm that once made men like Tank furious. "Regret?" he said softly. "I regret that it took violence for people to see peace." His words hung heavy in the air, a truth too raw for comfort. The world moved on, but those who listened couldn't forget. Because Dante's story wasn't just about one prison, one fight, or one man. It was about the quiet war fought every day by those whose humanity is questioned simply because of their skin. It was about systems built to break, and men who refused to bend. It was about a ghost, not the kind that haunts, but the kind that reminds us that injustice never really dies. It only hides until someone dares to face it. He walked through hell so the world could see its flames. The question is, how many more have to burn before we finally put the fire out?